everyone, welcome to TERF Wars Season 3, Episode 15. Yay! I hope you didn't just see my surprise face flash up when I pressed the wrong button there. Anyway, welcome to the show where we go through the last week's worth of gender critical, TERF, transphobic, anti-trans nonsense, and we look at it and we debunk it together, we laugh at it together, we deal with it, and then we move on. And the idea is to learn about what's going on, learn about how to counter it, and also have the catharsis of dealing with it with other people who are like, what the fuck is this? And this is going to be a what the absolute fuck week. I think that's going to be something that I say a few times. I thought my cough had gone. I don't know if anyone saw last week. I had a cough and it was quite annoying. It's got much better, and earlier today it was quite good, but now it's got later in the day. It's got worse again, which is really annoying. But also, maybe it didn't help that I stayed up till like 3 last night doing the Lions Sunday show, which you should all go and watch if you like to see me arguing about other things other than LGBT rights. And that was mainly about religion, but it also then went on to trans rights as well. So it was quite a good show. But one more thing I'll say, a couple more things I'll say before I move on. Oh dear. One is, I don't know if this makeup works. Let me know in the comments if you think it does. Like, in theory it should work, and I saw it on someone else and I was like, oh, that really worked. And so I totally stole it off them. It's like just inner orange, but I'm not totally sure. Maybe it's my skin color. I don't know. Anyway, another thing that I always say about TERF Wars is I've gone through and I've anonymized. I've anonymized most people. And that is because the idea of the show is not to target people. It's not to harass them. It's not to go and do a pile-on. I don't want that at all. That is not the purpose of this show. The purpose of the show is just to look at the ideas. So if I've anonymized someone, please don't go and look them up. I will block you from both this show and on Twitter if I find you doing that. Though there are some people who aren't censored, and it's usually because they're a big celebrity or a big organization or a gender critical person whose voice is like relevant in the gender critical movement. And it's important to know who it's come from as well as what they're saying, which does happen. And there's a few this week. There's a few every week, but still the point is not to go and find them and harass them or whatever. So I'm just always make that clear at the start. Oh, this better not be another cough episode. Anyway, I'll do my best to mute it like I did last week. But let's move on to some of the news that's happened this week. So, one thing to note was that this week was 9/11, which is actually the 11th of the 9th in every other place in the world than America, which, everyone knows about. And obviously there's a lot of discussion about that every year. And this guy, who I don't know, has said, what a beautiful tribute to 9/11 in New Jersey, the Memorial Teardrop. And it's kind of cool. It's just like a monument, and I guess it's, a tear, whatever. Anyway, for the first time ever, we're starting with the Alien Head of the Week award with this absolutely amazing comment. I don't think it's an accident. It looks like a vagina. I'm sure that was some people's first thoughts, but it wasn't really my first thought. And now here is a famous quote. This is famous, apparently, from Chris Corder, who I think I might actually put their link in the description. Is worth Wikipediaing because they are an interesting character. But this is their famous quote, which I'm sure you've all heard before, which has 118 likes. The towers are phallic, and the gashes made by the planes are vaginal. The violent penetrations ultimately deflate and invert the towers in a forced transsexual surgery that emasculates America. Ugh, why do people write this kind of stuff? Like, what are you on about? Like, the issue with these this attack and these kind of terrorist acts Isn't that it's like some symbolic emasculation of a country which apparently was a man and is now a woman? Congratulations on coming out, USA. But it's, you know, it's the terrorism bit. That's the issue. I just can't imagine what goes through these people's minds to just come out with this stuff. Like, you'd have to imagine just thinking, oh, this is so disgusting. It's so bad. It's like a transsexual. Fuck off, weirdo. Anyway, so this is an update on something we covered last week, which was the Scottish Gender Recognition Act consultation part 2 released all their responses and published them. And we went through the women's groups, most of which were just like single issue gender critical groups. But one of them was the Green Party of England and Wales. And the Green Party Women's Council were like, we didn't submit this. So they were doing an investigation to find out who did submit it on their behalf. And this person asked the old head of the Women's Green Party, who was gender critical, like, did you send this? And she's confirmed, no, neither I nor the previous committee wrote, saw, or submitted the response to the consultation. So that's interesting. So this person has asked the Scottish Government to remove the submission entirely because it was submitted falsely on false pretenses. But it's interesting. Who submitted? Who decided to submit like an inquiry, not on behalf of themselves or even one of the little crappy astroturfing groups, but on behalf of the Green Party of England and Wales? And then I got away with it? Something very weird. So we'll probably never find out, but hopefully the Scottish Government will remove it because obviously it's bogus. So, moving on to another ridiculous piece of news. Some random person who I don't know if they're anonymous, they don't have a picture, who has less than 2,000 followers or did have less than 2,000 followers, posted this tweet saying, on the 16th of July, I posted a tweet of J.K. Rowling saying, I ignore porn tweeted at children. This was entirely misleading as I took her words out of context. I was wrong to make this defamatory and untrue allegation and apologise to J.K. Rowling. Comments off. So this is very obvious the result of a lawsuit or a legal threat. So I didn't really understand the process until gender critical people started threatening me with lawsuits. But generally what someone will do is they will contact you in some way and say, I'm going to sue you unless you do this thing. So it's a bit like, a threat. It's just literally a threat. You must apologize or delete your tweet or whatever. And if you disagree to do that, then they might go on to then sue you, in which case they have to contact you, and then you get all the lawyers involved and there's loads of faff. Or you might do what they say or agree to do what they say and do a kind of informal dance, and then they'll promise not to sue you. And obviously the process of getting sued is horrible. It can cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. I mean, it's likely to cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. So even if you win, you need that money up front. And when you're a billionaire, that is nothing. What's £250,000 to someone with £1 billion? It's absolutely nothing. So rich people in the UK can just turn up to someone and say, I'm going to sue you unless you meet my demands. And then you would then know that even if you were right, even if what you did, which I'm not saying this person did was right or not right, even if you did do something that was true, like before I had a situation, I've had more than one situation where someone has threatened to sue me for saying something that is just factually true. But the thing is, they know that if I am worried about going to court because I need to somehow get £100,000 from somewhere, and as a trans person, I would then have, a gender critical person suing you, and as a medium prominent trans person would end up in the news and the Times and all this kind of shit. And it would be a huge drain on your life for months. It'd be horrible. So people don't want to do that. And if they say, all you've got to do is delete a tweet and apologise, people pick that just over the stress. So it's a bit like a plea bargain, where you haven't committed a crime, but going to trial and possibly risking losing even more. People just agree to community service or something, and then they have a criminal record, which might come interesting information next week. We will see. For something completely unrelated. But anyway, so I'm not going to republish the tweet that J.K. Rowling threatened this person over, because who knows what she's, I don't want to be the next target. She's just picking random people, and I think that is a strategy. If you just pick if you go for a big target, then everyone thinks, oh, I can say what I want because she's going for big targets. If you go for some random kid with 2,000 followers, you could be next. That's the impression she wants to give. There are so many people saying things about her, or, all kinds of ridiculous things, as well as all kinds of very true things. So to pick on some random comment that, there's no way this affected her reputation, which is something you need to prove for a defamation lawsuit. And it is a direct quote, word for word, of a part of what she said. So she said more, and you can go and look up the tweet yourself and make your own decision about whether you feel this person took it out of context or not, which they may or may not have done. I'm not commenting on this at all. I'm just saying that, this wasn't the case of someone like a newspaper publishing something untrue about you that affects your reputation and causes you to lose money, and so you can go and get reparations for that, which is what the point in defamation lawsuits is. This is a billionaire targeted some random who said something about them on Twitter to their 2,000 followers, and then them having to back down just out of fear. So, of course, the gender criticals absolutely love this, because, it's a display of supremacy. Their person, their billionaire who's on their side has, expressed, sort of flexed their muscles. Now, potentially, what this person said or did was wrong, and in which case they should have apologized for it. That seems sensible. However, threatening them with a lawsuit when you're a billionaire is not a sensible power dynamic. It's kind of terrifying, and it just kind of shows that when you're a billionaire, you're above the law. Certainly when it comes to defamation and stuff. And I don't think that it's the kind of system that you would be celebrating if you were a radical feminist, or a feminist of any kind, because, men can do this too to women with the same thing. And as with all systems like this, if you're a marginalized group, it affects you much worse. It's going to affect women much worse. It's going to affect trans people much worse. It's going to affect gay people much worse, and so on. So this, I don't know. I can't always read Dr. Jess Taylor where her position is. Sometimes she comes out with really crap stuff, and sometimes she comes out with decent stuff. This, I feel like I didn't understand her character, given that she came out with "feel that female money and power, baby." What are you just it just seems like you're just celebrating that a billionaire intimidated someone. I don't know, maybe it should be more like, I feel like what this person did was wrong and I'm glad they apologized. Or it just seems like a flex, the classic gender critical thing where they're like, oh, but they always just talk about females. And what they mean is gender critical people, which is mainly men, flexing on trans people. And this is kind of an example of that. There's a lot of things going on here, but I just think this is a really weird tweet. Anyway, so my friend Krista, who I did the XX Factor with, which is on my channel, which would be cool if you wanted to go and check it out. It's quite heavy in places, but it's really full of loads of information. She lives in America, where they are immune to defamation lawsuits pretty much. I think the chance of you getting, in trouble for defamation in America is almost nothing, which has pros and cons. But she reproduced the quote, which is why I censored it, because I'm not reproducing this quote. So you can go to Krista's timeline if you want to see it, I guess. And she got this little comment. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my sisters, and you will know my name is the JK when I lay my vengeance upon thee. What the fuck are you on about? Like, what the actual fuck? Here's the first one. First one in the episode. What is this? I mean, I guess this is like a quote from... shit, I've forgotten the film. Oh, don't kill me. A very famous film, which I do recognise. I can't remember the name. But also it's just like a really weird thing to do and say. Like some kind of Bible-style quote threatening vengeance upon, I don't know, gender-critical people, isn't it? So, this is another piece of news that's worth being aware of. Up until now, whenever anyone has talked about trans women in sports, there has always been a load of men showing up to talk about Fallon Fox, who was a UFC or MMA, I'm not sure about the difference, a very violent type of fighter who fought like 3 matches or 5 matches and won a couple of them and lost a couple of them. And then retired, and she was a trans woman and she fought against the cis women. And they all, they'll all talk about that because they want to talk about that time that she won and ignore the time that she lost, and talk about that time that she fractured someone's orbital ridge, even though that's a very common injury in UFC. Anyway, we've discussed that before on this channel, but now they can have another example because another trans woman fighter fought another cis woman this week and she won. Damn, I've forgotten her name. But anyway, I guess there's a few important things to discuss about this. She was shorter and in the same weight category, and the other lady consented to it. And, people decide whether to fight this match. And she pointed out that other people had decided not to fight against her. So this, to try and spin this as some kind of like coming in and dominating women's sports thing, is as usual nonsense. You can't use one single example like this to make some kind of statistical claim anyway. Either way, whether to say it's fair or to say it's not fair. But you're probably going to start seeing photos of this lady come up every single time someone talks about sports, because they have one example every 5 years of something, and then they just use the same photos and over and over again. And this guy, Jake Shields, whoever he is, some other fighting dude, MMA, says this is the woman MMA fighter that they just allowed to beat up a girl in Florida. So brave of her to transition and live her dream of beating up women. So there's a lot to unpack here. And then there's included a picture. And I just want to make it clear, this is a before and after. And if this was a situation where this guy had gone on some stalking website or, to get her before photos, then I absolutely wouldn't have republished them. And I didn't think anyone should. Like, she's published this tweet and it's a screenshot of a tweet that's on her timeline. So that's why it's here. So the first thing I want to point out is he's talking about a woman beating up a girl. So he's instantly doing this like misogynistic like reframing of what's going on here. You see this all the time when gender critical people are talking, transphobic people are talking. They always refer to trans women as men, and then they refer to like women as girls to try and make the dynamic seem more unfair. And that's what's going on here. They said this is the woman, in quotes, that they allowed to beat up a girl. Like, a woman beating up a girl shouldn't be allowed anyway, because no one should be able to beat someone else up. And like adults fighting children, that's terrible. But that isn't what happened here. This is a sports match. This isn't someone beating someone up. I mean, it kind of literally is, but when you say this person beat up this person, you wouldn't say that about like, in a boxing match. It's a different situation, and they're trying to invoke that. And it's the same with like living the dream of beating up women. Like, It's just nonsense. Like, this isn't some person who's like, oh, I'm going to go and beat up women, so the best way for me to do that was to transition and then enter into a fight consensually with someone, and it was actually quite a close fight, and the other person was bigger than me. Nonsense. But also, the point that this guy was trying to make is the classic gender critical point. It's the classic, like, anti-trans thing. They show a picture of what you look like now, and then they show a previous picture of you as a man to try and get the idea of you as being a man into the minds of the people who are seeing this. So you see this, like, here's a picture of a man, oh, he beat up this girl, and it's all to just make you emotionally react. But the thing is, he wouldn't have included the before photo, if the after photo made his point. Like, he wouldn't need to. He would have just included a photo of them stood next to each other. And, you know, there is one photo that they all like to show of this basketball game where there's like a trans woman and she's much taller than the rest of them. And it's still a nonsense argument to provide a photo as some kind of evidence to ban people from sports when you should be providing statistics or, you know, data and not taking things out of context. It's already nonsense. But for you to not even just post a photo as they are today, but to have to post a previous photo which shows how much transition has, like, done for their body, it's just a cell phone. Like, it's just ridiculous. Like, they don't think, and the reason they do this kind of thing, I mean, it's just quite plainly a cell phone. I think there will be some people who would fall for this. They'll be like, they'll see fighting, they'll see the word girl, they'll see a picture of a man, and they'll be like, this is like a giant man beating up a little girl. And that will be the reaction they have, and they'll be disgusted, and it will get combined in with transphobia, and they'll be like, yuck. I mean, that's why this has 3,000 likes. This guy got ratioed by about 15 different people, including me, for pointing out that he just cell-phoned himself. But it wins over some people. But it's nonsense. And of course, even if she, you know, hadn't had a sort of such a dramatic transition, just posting a photo wouldn't achieve anything other than to trigger people's transphobia off. But when you can't even post a photo to trigger people's transphobia off, and you have to post a before photo too, just kind of says, I failed at the one thing I'm trying to do. Oh dear, coughing. Right. So we've got some early brain rot here, but this brain rot is going to trigger off a cascade of nonsense, and then we'll get back to the brain rot. So this is a gender critical man, and he says, "Dear trannies, I feel like it's fine to call you that. After all, you call us the F word." No, we don't. No, I don't. I think that's ridiculous. There is some discussion about who can reclaim slurs, and having lots of trans women having been perceived as gay men before they come out as trans women were called the F word. I mean, I've been called the F word before, like both before and after coming out, both on the street and on the internet. So it is a slur that is targeted at me and at my demographic. But that doesn't mean I would then go around calling people in it, and I certainly wouldn't be calling it to cis gay men, because, you know, especially if you're read as like a cis straight woman or something, that would be completely ridiculous. I'm sure that a trans person has called a gay person the F word before, and I'm sure they've created a little collage of it and mixed in a load of anonymous accounts with anime profile pictures that have nothing to do with trans people, and then some completely unrelated stuff, and then built this picture that trans people call gay people the F word. Even if all trans people call gay people the F word, it wouldn't actually then be acceptable to then call them a slur back, because calling people slurs is wrong. If all gay people call trans people trannies, I wouldn't call them the F word back, because that would be wrong. Of course they don't, and of course trans people don't call gay people the F word. He just wanted an excuse to say it. And he censored it here, but then later on he says it and he doesn't censor it, so nonsense. He says, "Are you okay? Seriously though, are you okay? I feel we need to have a talk. older bro gay to newly emerged tranny about this whole LGBTQ thing and being in a gender sexual minority. I thought this was ridiculous because it's so condescending. I mean, from this guy's picture, he's not like 70, but even if he was, why don't you talk to a trans? Why haven't you already talked to a trans woman who came out before you were born? Like, you're talking as if like you're the old guard and all the trans people are newly emerged. Like, what does that even mean? There have been trans people for longer than you've been alive, mate. Like, they were fighting for your rights while you were a child. Like, this is classic gender critical men thinking they own a place when they've done absolutely nothing, and talking as if trans people haven't done things before. Just pretty pathetic. And then combined with that slur thing, I just thought, well, that's nonsense. But then I clicked, just, clicking around. This got 500 likes, which is ridiculous. Of course, I mean, it's just got the word tranny in it, so loads of gender critical people wanted an excuse to like that, I'm sure. But one person was our friend from last week who says, this thread is everything? What? This is a straight cis woman, by the way, who, what? What? I mean, just imagine a situation where trans people were new and we were all marching around saying we're part of the LGBT movement and all the old guard gays were like, oh, they're all doing it wrong. And, what people in LGBT Alliance claim is actually happening. Just imagine that's true. It still wouldn't then be acceptable for straight cis women to be like, yeah, exactly. Like, you tell them trannies, like, no, this is nothing to do with you, mate. Fuck off. Anyway, I saw that and I was like, oh, she's back again. I hope she hasn't done any more nonsense about what we were talking about last week, which was gender critical people don't know what the fuck the Gender Recognition Act reform is. They do not know. Go watch the episode last week if you don't want to know. I mean, if you do want to know. But she still has no idea at all. People have been talking to her all week, linking her articles, showing her the actual act, explaining it patiently, explaining it not patiently. I saw 10 or so of her tweets saying, well, this is going to happen. And I came in and said, this is wrong. I don't know where you got this idea from. Here's an article. Here's the links. Here's the sources. So here she is, like a week later, saying, seriously, if I was considering transitioning, I would be mortified by the GRA bill being proposed by the Scottish Government. You no longer have to receive any counselling for gender dysphoria. Okay, so why is that an issue? Let's go on. People with gender dysphoria may have changed their appearance, behaviour or their interests. They may also show signs of discomfort or distress, including low self-esteem, blah, 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 blah. Gender dysphoria can have profoundly negative impact on a person. The Scottish Government wants to get rid of the need for any counselling for it. Imagine if the Scottish Government decided you no longer needed counselling for an eating disorder. Would that not be... So here, this is just unreal. What's happening is currently, in order to get a gender recognition certificate, you have to be diagnosed as a trans person by someone on a certain list of experts in the UK, which is only a limited number. In order to do that, you need to go through the GIC system, which takes 7+ years. And part of that is mandatory counselling and seeing a counsellor, who I've had very bad experiences with. Anyway, so we want to take that out of the process for getting a GRC, which allows you to get married and die and apply for a student loan in a foreign country and whatever you, because it's ridiculous. Because holding someone's life up for 7+ years is just, there's no reason for it. It's just bullshit. It's a legacy from a different era where this law, was in a different context, particularly around marriage, where gay marriages weren't allowed, and now they are. It just doesn't make any sense. Not that it ever made sense to ban gay marriage, but so when the government is saying we're taking the requirement away that you will have to have counselling, they're not saying you're no longer able to have counselling for gender dysphoria. Like the medical treatment side, the part of transitioning, which, you know, in order to get, there's still the diagnosis process. You still need to get diagnosed to get medical treatment, and that's still going to involve therapy, whether you go private or public. That's still there. That's still a thing. It's just you don't need to have already done that in order to get a GRC. They're disconnected. These are separate processes. So that's kind of ridiculous. But then this one, she's like, prediction. When this GRA bill passes, and sadly I suspect it will, as soon as unisex toilets are set to replace single-sex toilets in schools across Scotland, and there is an mighty backlash, the First Minister will throw out the TRAs under the bus and say she was forced to change the law. I mean, maybe if they did introduce gender-neutral toilets or unisex toilets into all schools and replace single-sex toilets, people would backlash. But that's nothing to do with the GRA. Why are you like this? It's just, where has this come from? Like, before, I mean, the classic gender critical claim is it will allow men into women's spaces. Nothing to do with that. But here is like some claim about toilet provisions. Like, how would that even, like, what, I have to get a GRC in order for the government to build a toilet in a school? Like, use your brain, come on, please. Just listen to someone, talk to a single trans person before spending weeks campaigning against our rights. Come on. Oh, it's so frustrating. Anyway, on this topic of opposing trans people's rights and the government, here is a Labour MP, Rosie Duffield, who somehow is still in Labour. She's been doing the J.K. Rowling thing of following a few people and then following a few more people and then exclusively following gender critical people and then liking a few bullshit tweets and then liking a lot of bullshit tweets and then liking some really fucking bullshit tweets. And, you know, having 2 staffers quit over her attitude towards LGBT people, including an LGBT person, both women. Like, this has been building up for a while and people have asked her to, you know, comment on it, and she's just had a bullshit attitude towards particularly trans people, but towards LGBT people in general. And here she is writing something about a Conservative councillor who happens to be gay. Anyway, that spurred her off to go on to say, I also have feminist and gender critical beliefs. Something I just want to point out here. Have you noticed how gender critical people go around saying being trans is a religion, being trans is a blind belief system, blah, 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 blah. But you don't ever see a trans person saying my trans beliefs, because being trans isn't a belief. It's not a belief system. There's nothing to it. Like, there are some trans people who don't even think trans people should have rights. Saying my trans beliefs is like saying my left-handed beliefs. Like, not even all left-handed people write with their left hand. That's going to get taken out of context, but it's true. Anyway, gender critical people love to say my gender critical beliefs, and that's because it is a belief system. It's an irrational belief system, and it's not founded on anything in reality. But she goes on, because gender critical can now mean a few, you know, it's got a range of things. It could mean just what Mayor Forstater defined it as in her legal case, which is the belief that sex is immutable. And if that's the case, I don't care. Imagine you're a normal person, but you're gender critical in the sense of what Mayor Forstater has argued. If that's the case, then, all right, I mean, it doesn't mean anything to me. You're not campaigning against my rights. You're not campaigning against my freedoms. You're not misgendering me. You're not calling me the wrong name. You're being normal to me. You're not being transphobic. Like, I don't care at all if you happen to think that sex is immutable. However, the issue is that isn't just what gender critical people think. They then use that as a premise to base their entire, well, actually, they use that as an excuse to justify the transphobia, but in theory, they would use that as a premise to then go on and say, I also think that anyone who was born male should be banned from women's spaces, for example. And then that is the belief that trans women, like me, trans girls, should be banned from the spaces we use today. And then suddenly that's like some kind of really extremist belief which would ruin my life and you have absolutely no justification for. So there's a range of views. So when she says my gender critical beliefs, we don't know when she's going to go until she elaborates on it, which she does. She says, of course, Hester the Lulu, I've always supported the rights of trans people. I do not accept self-ID as a passport for male-bodied biological men to enter protected spaces for biological women. That includes domestic violence shelters, women's prisons, single-sex wards, and school toilets. So this is one of those cases where self-ID just means whatever they want it to mean. And it usually just means trans people. I mean, if we're talking about self-ID in terms of Gender Recognition Act, I mean, that doesn't affect who goes inside these protected spaces and any of the things she's listed. It's certainly nothing to do with whether you have a GRC or not. So this is, the Equality Act, effectively, which she's campaigning against. And she's chosen to use the terms male-bodied biological men. And they do this, for a number of reasons. One, it gives them this kind of a plausible deniability. Because if she was saying, I don't want men in women's spaces, I'd be like, cool. If I hadn't ever seen a gender critical person before, that would mean nothing to me. That would be like, yeah, all right, no problem. But knowing that as a gender critical person, you think that sex cannot change, and that male-bodied biological men actually covers trans women, and when we're talking about school toilets, covers trans girls. Male-bodied biological men is how she is describing, like some 13-year-old girl. Or, some trans woman who has lived every single day of the last 30, 40 years of her life as a woman. Just like, oh, you shouldn't be allowed in these spaces. I mean, what's their alternative to self-ID? Are they saying document checks, or they just mean a total ban? And this is where self-ID can mean anything, because we don't know. There's never a proposal. It's always concerns. It's always, I don't like self-ID. But then, what is your alternative here? Banning all trans people? Possibly. Having some kind of ridiculous document check system? And changing the Equality Act? Possibly. I mean, that is technically better than a total ban, but it's still bullshit. And again here, this is her railing against the Equality Act 2010, which has been in place since 2010. So any reason for this we'd have over a decade's worth of evidence that school toilets or domestic violence shelters are suffering because of the Equality Act, and they're not. So this is, garbage. And then she goes on to say that people who disagree with her are being misogynistic, which is ridiculous. But then she says, my sin is to agree that male-bodied people should not be included in lists of murdered women. Which, again, if this is like a cis man, yeah, they shouldn't be on a list of women who were murdered for being women, because we're trying to highlight and discuss misogynistic violence, which targets women. But it targets trans women and cis women. Like, trans women don't magically escape from misogynistic violence just because you have some belief that they have this property called sex, which is they can't change. I mean, maybe you think it's chromosomes, maybe you think it's gametes. We never actually know, because gender critical people can never actually define what sex actually is, because to them it's just some magical essence you have at birth. But I don't care whether you believe that or not. It doesn't matter. It is a fact that trans women suffer from misogynistic violence and are killed for being women, as well as often killed for being trans too. And and are attacked for being women and face misogynistic sexism. And if you want to start taking them away from this discussion and, you know, from our ability to combat misogynistic violence, you're just contributing to the misogyny. You're just protecting the misogynists who did that violent act against a woman. So, like, this is just inexcusable garbage. And it just, like, the reason she says all this male-bodied nonsense is to try and do this thing that we're just looking at with this UFC person, to try and conjure up in your mind, like, just a man, and to try and hide under the carpet the fact that she's talking about all trans women, you know, including trans women who are like stealth and all this kind of stuff. That's just nonsense. And then she does the classic, her sin was to like a tweet by Piers Morgan when he read health advice post about people with a cervix, and he said, "Do you mean women?" While there may have been a very small number of people who now identify as men and still have female organs, the vast majority of women should not have to rename our bodies or ourselves accordingly. Yeah, I mean, this is this thing that, like, we did in, I don't know, ages ago with the thing where it's like, I don't want to sacrifice my breasts to political correctness. And then when you actually look at the NHS document, it's like, don't forget that while most women will want to be called mothers and have their, you know, be described as women and mothers, some people who give birth aren't women and aren't mothers, and they are actually trans men or non-binary people, and they might use different terms. So be aware that you might need to change terms. And then there's something like, oh, we're not even allowed to say women anymore. No, that's not what it's about. Fuck off. It's ridiculous. Then she says, I will continue to support LGBT rights as I've done all my life. Like, if you want to ban trans girls from using the toilet at school, which is completely unjustifiable, and you're describing them as male-bodied, manly, biological men with manly menness, like, that is not supporting trans rights. That is garbage. Just listen to people. Just fuck off. It's just so bullshit. Of course, this, I mean, quite a lot of people angry about this gender critical beliefs tweet, but she blocked me when I responded to it, and loads of other people, and of course the Labour Party is going to do nothing about this, and people are kind of sick of it. So a few high profile trans people from the Labour Party have resigned. This is Arthur Webber, who's a comedian. He wrote a note about it, just saying it's just, how can you feel safe in a party where some of their politicians are campaigning to take away the rights you have today based on nothing, based on some belief system which isn't justifiable? So I understand why people don't want to be in a party like that before. And there's another one, Ros Kavanagh said, I think that should Rosie Duffield not be deprived of the Labour whip over her appalling remarks, I shall have no option but to resign from the Labour Party. My apologies to my friends in the Labour Party. I think it's fairly reasonable. I mean, I never quite know what to do with this kind of thing. Because on one hand, you're being principled, you're making a stand, potentially you can make enough noise, which could make the Labour Party be like, whoa, we're losing all the trans people, we're losing trust from the LGBT community, so we need to do something about it. Or sometimes you step aside and then more bigots just show up and they just take over. So it's very difficult to know, like, what the best strategy is here. And I don't think I could blame anyone for resigning, and I don't think I could blame anyone for signing up and trying to change it. But it's not right at the moment. I mean, it's garbage. But then Debbie Hayton says, and Debbie Hayton is a gender-critical trans person who writes for Russia Today and other various propaganda outlets, including The Spectator, which routinely posts misogynistic garbage. She says, go if you must, Ros, but I'm sticking with UK Labour. This is my party and I'm proud to be a member. I mean, this is the kind of thing I was just talking about. Rosie Duffield has my total support. She is principled and courageous. Women's right to single-sex spaces, places and associations must be upheld. So this is, we have no business there. Single sex spaces. So this is just the standard gender critical thing. They must be upheld, but what she's asking for here is to repeal the Equality Act, which happened 11 years ago, and before that there was another act which guaranteed trans women the right to use women's spaces from 1999. So there's nothing upheld here. This is directly a campaign against rights we have today. But then Debbie Hayton is saying, we have no business there. We, as in trans women, as in Roz, as in Debbie, as in me, have no business in women's spaces, places. I don't know why she said those two. I guess maybe places on, like, when they say there needs to be at least 40% women, that's like a place for women. And associations must be upheld. So Debbie Hayton's pretty straightforwardly saying here, people like her, trans women like her, or trans women, should not be in women's spaces. And this is, like, she's spoken at Women's Place UK, and that's one of their positions, so they're rather sneaky about it. But then this surfaced, which was interesting, which is someone from 2018. So Debbie doesn't talk about what spaces she uses anymore. And she's very quiet about any position she holds. And if you directly ask her on anything, she often just will not answer. I wonder why. But here someone says, "Hi Debbie, I hope you don't mind me messaging you. I've read your articles and I have a question." She says, "Please go ahead. It's about your letter in The Guardian and where you stand as trans females, specifically what concerns me as a regular swimmer, as to which changing facilities you believe I should use, and I guess toilets too." She says, "This is what I did from the day of transition. Female toilets, changing rooms, private cubicles, either in the women's or unisex disabled. At all times I was sensitive to women around me, but never had issues." So, from the day of transition, I mean, I guess that's the day you go full-time. So you've come out and you've started living full-time, or maybe it was from the day she first came out to someone, or I don't know, at some stage early in transition, she started using women's toilets and changing rooms, but with cubicles, and then says, after GRS, I used communal changing rooms with other women. So uses women's open plan, naked, changing spaces. Then this person is like, which surely goes against what Women's Party UK want. She says, not at all, I use female toilets with women at WP UK meetings all the time, not an issue. So what's the problem around aggression? Anyway, here's a screenshot. These aren't my DMs. I don't know the person that this came from. I mean, I did see who posted it, but I don't know them well enough to vouch for their reputation. Potentially faked. Debbie hasn't commented on it at all. She's definitely seen it. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if this was true. It just seems very specific to fake. I'm going with this is true. This is a real screenshot, unless it's contested. But that's interesting because just here, she was saying trans women have no right to be in women's places. And this is a key part of her, like, presence online. She is the trans woman who you get in if you want to write something about trans rights and say trans people shouldn't have these rights anymore, because she'll agree with you. She'll say, Rosie Duffield's great. Oh, yeah, have me write an article about her for your paper. Oh, yeah, I think trans women should be banned from women's spaces. And then in private, she's using women's spaces. And not just like using cubicle toilets or whatever. She's using communal changing rooms. I have never in my life used a communal changing room. Even post-surgery. I mean, it's been locked down most of the time. But I don't really like them. I don't really want to get naked in front of a load of people. I don't really want to see other people getting naked in front of me, regardless of whether they're men or women, or whatever their gender is. I'm not really... Let's get rid of communal changing rooms. They're unsafe, and especially in the age of smartphones, like, grim for perverts. But anyway, that is what she's been doing. And then I thought, hang on, I wonder if she has signed the WHRC declaration, because this is kind of vague, but the WHRC declaration is quite explicit and it's quite a big deal. So let's do a little detour here before we find out whether that's true or not. Let's just look at the WHRC declaration, because I mention it quite a lot of times, and usually when people mention it, or they mention the WHRC, or they talk about extremism in the gender critical movement, they will post the Gender Recognition Act inquiry submission from the WHRC. That's a bit of a mouthful. Basically, WHRC is an organisation run by Sheila Jeffries, Heather Bruskel Evans, and someone else. You can look. I've put all the links in the website, in the description below to their website with all their information. And it's something that loads of the major gender critical people and organisations have signed up to. And they've written this declaration, and it's worded like a governments should do this kind of thing. And for example, LGBT Alliance has signed it. And loads, these small groups like Resistors and that kind of stuff have signed it. Some of the big gender critical voices have signed it. Not all of them. But usually we just look at this other thing that they submitted because it's much more condensed and it's pretty crazy. And it calls for like the little condensed one says that trans people are the result of porn, sissy hypno porn, and that all trans healthcare should be banned. But the thing is, this submission, this other thing I'm talking about, this little condensed one, no one signed up to that. That was what they sent in private to the government, which they knew the government was going to publish. But people have been signing their declaration for years, so people are signing up to this. They weren't necessarily signing up to the other thing. So I think it's just worth looking. So we're just going to spend a little time to just go through some of the things. You can look in the description at the full declaration. It's quite long. They also have a summary. I don't think it's worth looking at the summary because it's a bit more concealed. So the first thing to note about this is some of it is good. Like some of it is things like women should have reproductive freedom. That is unambiguously good. And I would sign a document that was the, if they just said women should have reproductive freedom, I'd sign that. I'd sign my name on that publicly. I would be happy for anyone to know that because that is my publicly stated position and it's morally good. And there is a few other things in here which are genuinely good. But most of it is focused around trans people. But they try and not make that super obvious, though it is. They've just trodden on the other side of the line. I think WP UK, which is one of the groups we were just discussing, has gone just on the other side of the line where it's not quite clear that they're explicitly calling to ban trans people from public spaces, for example. These guys are just straight up saying it, but it is still a bit coded because they can never quite be honest. But so there's a long list of declarations, but this one, so these are snippets from it. So this one says, single-sex provisions should include, inter alia, specialised services for women and girls subject to violence such as rape, support services, specialist health facilities, specialist police investigation facilities, and shelters for women and children fleeing domestic abuse or other. It should also include all other services within which single-sex provisions promote the physical safety, privacy, and dignity of women and girls. These include prisons, health services, hospital wards, substance misuse rehabilitation centres, accommodation for the homeless, toilets, showers, and changing rooms, and any enclosed space where individuals may reside or be in a state of undress. Single-sex facilities designed to meet the needs of women and girls should be at least equal in availability and quality to those provided to boys and men. That's all good. I am totally on board with all of that. We have one sentence to go, but I'm totally on board with all of that. However, the last sentence, and this is what this whole document is about. This is one of these, like this, I would describe this as a TERF document as opposed to like a gender critical one. Because a gender critical one wouldn't be, like everything that gender critical people do is just about trans people. They wouldn't have a line saying women need reproductive freedom. They wouldn't have a line, calling for an end to domestic violence or something, because they're just not feminists and they don't care. And all they're doing is using feminist sounding language to target trans rights. Like true TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists, some of them, they all have some kind of feminist background. And this is kind of my distinction. I don't know if everyone else agrees with it, but I genuinely believe that these people care that women have reproductive freedom. I think most gender critical people either don't care, aren't fussed about focusing on it. We'll come to that later in the brain rot section of this episode, or lots of them are just opposed to it. And that's the difference. So when they're talking about all this sounds like a feminist thing because they have a feminist background, but it is all focused around trans people. And you can see this because the last sentence says, these facilities should not include men who claim to have female gender identities. Now, at the top of this document, they explain how, trans women are men with female gender identities, and they think that gender identity is completely made up, and they think it's all just total nonsense, and it is just literally just men saying, I'm a woman. That's their premise. So that's, when reading this sentence, it's important to note they don't just mean some trans people. They don't just mean like someone who's come out as a trans woman and who hasn't transitioned medically or socially yet or whatever. They don't mean those people. They mean all trans women. They mean me. They mean Kim Petras. They mean Nicole Maines. They mean every single trans woman, all of us. And we covered as either men or boys with female gender identities. So this very explicitly, straight out, says that we should be banned from all women's spaces, all of them. They've listed them all here. So from prisons and stuff, which can be controversial, to toilets, which, this is a bathroom bill and it's an explicit blanket ban of all trans people in all cases. And that's kind of the focus of this whole section. Here's another one. States should recognise that medical interventions aimed at gender reassignment of children by the use of drugs and surgery are emerging harmful practices that are defined by blah, 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 blah. States should establish data collection and monitoring processes in relation to these practices and enact and implement legislation aimed at eliminating them. They like the word eliminate. They call to eliminate transgenderism in their little submission thing. I think if you search elimination in the document, there's 18 cases the word eliminate. Anyway, they want to eliminate trans healthcare for children. States' provisions should include legal protection and appropriate care for children harmed by such practices and the availability of redress and reparations. So this is calling for a total ban of all trans healthcare for children, no exceptions. That's under 18s. And the government should outlaw it, but it should also make it available to, redress and reparations. Potentially that could just mean the government reimbursing them, or it could mean suing people, as they've tried to push in some American states. So this is a bit more than just banning trans healthcare. There's an extra layer to that. One thing I will just make clear, I do think that the state should cover help for anyone who is harmed by transition. And if that includes a trans person who does medical transition and something doesn't go to plan, the state should help them. Equally, if there's a detrans person who realizes that they were never trans or transition wasn't for them and they feel like it's harmed them, or even if they just want transition help back going the other way, the state should help that too. But this isn't really what they're talking about. They're referring to it's innately harmful. They're saying that all of these practices are harmful. So what they mean by appropriate care, if I was being charitable, I would say perhaps they mean any kids who have transitioned so far can do what they want, but any who feel like, the handful of detransitioners should get help. I suspect what they would actually mean if they got the chance, given the fact they want a total blanket ban of all healthcare and make it completely illegal, trying to eliminate it, that they actually mean some kind of conversion therapy. Who knows? Here's another part. States should uphold the right of everyone to describe others on the basis of their sex rather than their gender identity in all contexts. States should recognise that attempts by state agencies, public bodies and private organisations to compel individuals to use terms related to gender identity rather than sex are a form of discrimination against women and shall take measures to eliminate this, is that word, form of discrimination. states should prohibit any form of sanctioning, prosecution, or punishment of persons who reject attempts to compel them to identify others on the basis of gender identity rather than sex. So what this is calling for is absolutely no protections at all in any context, in any way at all, for misgendering or outing people, or, you know, calling them the wrong thing at all. So that this is like no protection, you know, for those things. So it's a total like opposite of protection from harassment for being a trans person. And like in all contexts, so this is absolutely going to cover outing people, because you should be protected to say what you think the sex of someone is. So if you find out someone's stealth and they're living as, you know, and they're a trans person, you should be allowed to out them and tell everyone and put it in a newspaper or whatever. So this is very extreme. This is pretty barbaric. This isn't the case of where they're whinging about Canada's Bill C-16, which protects trans people from misgendering in the same way that it protects other minority groups from harassment. Isn't saying like, oh, it's gone a bit too far, or, you know, I don't want to accidentally misgender a trans person and get in trouble, which is some of what some people say is actually nonsense. That isn't what the bill is about. But that isn't an argument. Here they're saying we want complete protection to call trans people whatever the fuck we want in any context. So that's grim. I think we've got one more here. I just really want to get across how extreme this group is. You know, there's no room for, there's no grey areas here. There's no like, oh, maybe they didn't quite mean that. Like they're explicitly calling for full-on pretty intense stuff. So here this one says, states should promote research, collect data and compile statistics, especially concerning domestic violence, relating to the prevalence of different forms of violence against women. So this top bit, totally agree with. That is what states should do. That's very good. Then it says, this should include recognition that violence against women is one of crucial social mechanisms by which women as a sex are forced into a subordinate position compared to men as a sex, and that accurate research and data collection relating to violence against women and girls requires that the identification of both the perpetrators and the victims of such must be based on sex and not gender identity. So again, just to decode, though this is quite explicit, this is saying that any kind of stuff about statistics about violence against women, any kind of provisions or dealing with misogynistic violence at all should treat trans women as men. So that means that if some trans woman gets beaten up for being a woman, it should be recorded as male on male violence. And that, as we've already discussed when we were talking about the Rosie Duffield thing, conceals misogynistic violence. It stops us from being able to analyse it. It allows misogynists to get away with it. It's bad for women. So I like that. That one is quite important. Oh, and there's one more here, which is just completely ridiculous. States should recognise that medical research, which is aimed at enabling men to gestate and give birth to children, is a violation of the physical and reproductive integrity of girls and women, and is to be eliminated as a form of sex-based discrimination. So they really don't want trans women having wombs. Or cis men, you know, going forwards to the Jennifer Billock transhumanist agenda. Like, cis men, go and get 4 wombs, mate. Do what you want. That'd be a pretty bad period if it all happened at once. But like, so this is, you know, targeted at trans people. This whole document is targeted to trans people. There's a couple of good things in there which aren't targeted about trans people, which gives us this like credibility that it's a feminist document. And it is written by people who I think probably have a feminist background. But I just really want to highlight a few things. One, this is explicitly about trans people throughout. It calls for total blanket bans of trans women from women's spaces, from any statistics combating misogyny for trans women, you know, for any kind of positions or things to help deal with misogyny that trans women face, like in the workplace. It calls for a total ban of all trans healthcare for trans children. Like, this thing is very extreme. This is not a compromisable gender critical position. This isn't I have a few concerns. This isn't, oh, I support trans people, but I think that it's gone too far. Like, whatever you want to try and say, all of which I think is nonsense, but it's none of that. This is full on, like, black and white, fuck you trans people. We want to take away the rights you have today. Every single one of you in the country. So I was like, well, I want to see if Debbie Hayton has signed this. So I said, has anyone got all of the WHRC declarations, signatures as a searchable list? Because you can go on their website and you can just see who signed it. You can see all the organisations who've signed it, and you can see all the people who've signed it, and you can just scroll through. And you can Control F on your browser to find them. But they've paginated it, so there's like 100 pages of these signatures, so you can't just do Control F and search the whole list. You can only search like 100 at a time, and then you have to click on another one and do the search again. I couldn't be asked, and I thought maybe someone knows an easy way of searching through their public list of signatures of people who have signed up saying, I want to remove the rights of every single trans person in the entire world. I mean, this is meant to be an international declaration, and people have signed it from all over the world. But at least in my country, I want to absolutely decimate the rights that trans women and girls, particularly, but all trans people need to live, including healthcare and access to spaces which protect them from misogynistic violence. Because I wanted to see if Debbie Hayton was on it. But we got a fucking ridiculous gender critical reaction to this, which I absolutely did not see coming. Completely mad. So we got some completely ridiculous replies. Here we have a ridiculous reply wall. And this, I mean, it's like, what the fuck? What the actual fuck? This person says, threatening women, like, has this public list of signatures, is there a way to search through this public list of public signatures that people have publicly added to a public list? Oh, harassing women. By the way, like, half the signatures are on here are men. So, as always, just total nonsense. Such female behaviour. Oh, sorry, it's not female enough for me to want to do some journalism and see if, like, what's a public figure who, like, their entire thing is like, you know, oh, I'm a trans woman and I think trans people should be banned from things, but then we've just discovered that she uses women's spaces, and like, it's kind of relevant if they've signed this document calling for a total blanket ban of trans women using women's spaces, because that's hypocritical and it's actually quite a big deal. And in a place where we had any kind of press that would publish anything bad about gender critical people at all, maybe it'd be relevant. I mean, I think it's interesting to trans people, whether this is true or not. But no, apparently it's too male a behaviour to be a journalist. What are you planning, Katie? Gonna hire a hitman or get all these women and men fired or even physically attacked by the men you represent? Sounds like targeted harassment to me. Yeah, you know what? If I was hiring a hitman to, I mean, what? Go after Debbie Hayton or go after everyone on the, like, that would be targeted harassment, actually. But you know what? I'm not hiring a hitman, you absolute ridiculous person. What the actual fuck? Where has this come from? It's just so ridiculous. Like, hiring a hitman. I was like, hey, you know that list of people who have signed this thing saying they want to ruin my life? They want to take away the rights I need to live. I'd like to see if someone is on there, like, this public list. They're like, oh, that sounds like you're trying to kill them. What are you on about? Fucking ridiculous. Oh, gee, I wonder what you want this list for, Katie. I'm sure it's just for research purposes. I mean, that makes it sound like some kind of sex thing. Like, what's wrong with you? What a male thing to do. Oh, it's so male. Definitely. Any kind of journalism is male. Why did you add your name in the first place? So, when I asked about this, they went and added my name to this list several times, including spelling my name wrong several times. One of them thought it'd be funny to say that I was from the Isle of Man, which, I mean, I guess is kind of funny. But then they all started doing it. And, I mean, this is a bit of a self-own because it just shows how easy it is to just fake signatures. Like, they've got a thing from Antarctica. Like, I feel like if you've got many signatures from Antarctica, they're probably all fake. I think, like, if I've signed it loads, then it's fake because Debbie Hayton signed it, calling for a removal of her own rights that she uses every single day today. So maybe I have signed it. Maybe I'm a hypocritical dickhead with zero integrity who is riding off a wave of selling myself out. Maybe I am. But then ask me why I've signed it. Like, did you actually think that was me? Like, what's wrong with you? You seem obsessed with being a misogynist and it's getting out of hand. King, oh, very clever. What social or physical retribution are you or others intending to enact against women who dare to sign? Like, dared. Oh, you took a dare to say, I want to completely ruin the lives of every single trans person in the country. I mean, that is a bit of a daring thing to do, actually, because it's fucking sick. Like, it's disgusting. You're saying publicly, I want to ruin tens of thousands of people's lives. I want to take away from them what they have been doing for my entire life. It's disgusting. I mean, I guess dared to sign is the right thing, but dared to be a supremacist is like saying, oh, yeah, I dared to sign a thing asking to deport all immigrants or something. Like, yeah, you just dared to be a piece of shit, didn't you? Ridiculous person. Social or physical reputation. Like, instantly just accusing me of, like, planning violence. But, like, by the way, this is the data you get from the list. A name, a date, and a thing saying they're from Antarctica. Like, I mean, this has my actual address on it, you know? The United Kingdom was the person who added my name to this list, revealing some physical information about me. Are they planning physical retribution against me? Are they hiring a hitman to kill me with this new information? No, because you couldn't hire a hitman to kill someone just based on which country they're from. If they're not a public figure, and if they're a public figure, then I wouldn't get the information from a list that only had... Oh, it's just so stupid. It's so absolutely beyond the realm of plausible confusion. Like, this is all just made up nonsense. Everything here is fucking garbage. Why? Because you want to stalk and harass women. Yeah, mate, I'm going to go to Antarctica and I'm going to get the list of people who signed from Antarctica, and then I'm going to go around knocking on doors and being like, is your name Katie Montgomery? And they're going to be like, I don't speak English because I'm on a research base here from Argentina. Like, go away. Fucking ridiculous. Reported to the relevant authority. Reported to the authorities. What are you doing? What are you going to do? Ring up and say, oh, someone online is looking at a public list to see if a famous person is on the list, and they sign their own name on the list. Reported it to the data commissioner. Why do you get more unhinged by the day? I mean, maybe I am getting a bit unhinged today because this is so ridiculous. It's just incredible. Why and for what purpose? Not a stalker-like behaviour at all. You collected the list, guys. You wrote your name on a list with all your mates saying you want to ruin my life. I mean, and made it publicly available for people to search through. He's making a list, he's checking it twice, he's going to find out who's a filthy TERF that must be annihilated. What are you talking about? The document you've signed calls for the elimination of transgenderism and the elimination of trans healthcare and the elimination of research into helping trans people get pregnant and the elimination of trans people using the toilet in public. Like, I don't think that your level of hyperbole is in the right direction at all, mate. This shows how nasty person you are. I believe in karma. I mean, what is that? I mean, I feel like the karma for finding out that someone who's trying to take away your rights is a hypocrite is probably like maybe finding £3 coins on the floor. So hopefully karma is real, but it's not. However, What you give out will come back to haunt you. Sounds like a threat. Fed up with the trans Taliban bullying and threatening others. Just again, I just really want to highlight this. This is a list of people who have signed a thing saying they want to ruin my life. They want to take away rights I use every single day of my life. Going to public toilets, having protections from misogynistic sexism, knowing that if I'm attacked, it will get recorded as a crime against women. So as a feminist, I can highlight those issues and campaign against them. These things affect me every single day. And you've signed a list saying you want to take them away. And when I say, oh, is this person on it? It's bullying. Like, what world do you live in? My goodness. You know your cause is wrong when you need to start resorting to threats. Yeah. Do you know who's done the threat? You, when you said, this will come back to haunt you. Ridiculous person. Stay out of female spaces, Katie. You're displaying the warning signs. I mean, the warning signs for you lot are that I'm a trans woman, and that's enough because you are transphobic. Yeah, there's some me being listened. And then I found out that I think most of it was coming from this guy. I don't know, like he's gone off on something about how me asking for a list is, you know, asking to see if someone can sort through the list. By the way, some people did reply saying, oh, I wrote a script which just condenses the list all onto one page. But I didn't need to. I didn't click on any of them. I didn't download any of them. I didn't interact with any of them at all. I didn't actually need to because when I posted it, someone DM'd saying, oh, if you're asking about Debbie Hayton, I know that she signed the list. I was like, oh, okay. So I posted shortly afterwards, and I posted mine, which you can go and look, at 3 p.m. 3:30 p.m. 2 hours before this guy posted his thing saying, collecting names for an unknown reason. I'm not collecting names. WHRC were collecting names for a known reason, to find people who want to take away all the rights I need to live. You know what I was doing? Because I posted, oh, I've found out Debbie Hayton did in fact sign this. And then she replied confirming, saying, you could have just asked me. I could have just asked her, but seeing as she usually lies about what she's done, I didn't want to ask her. I didn't really want to talk to her, to be honest. Then he goes on like, claiming that has a virus. I don't know where that's come from. Saying it's targeted, that it's against the Equality Act to go on their website and look at who signed their thing. Calling to, by the way, revoke the Equality Act. Like, you're literally, I mean, I don't know if this guy signed it, but the gender critical people on this list have signed a thing saying, we want to get rid of the Equality Act. That is literally what this whole thing is. Every single thing they ask for about trans people requires repealing the Equality Act and the Gender Recognition Act, and probably whatever came before that, the Sex Equality Act of 1999 or whatever it's called. They want to repeal all of these laws all the way back. So to complain that me asking who's on that list, or one person, to ask if one person is on the list, a celebrity even, well, a public figure, and then suggest they call 111. Which, for anyone not in the UK, we have two like police emergency numbers, or for fire brigade and for NHS and stuff. 999 is emergency. I need something now, and 111 is like I want to talk to these services, but it's not now. So like you call 111 if you've got like if you've had like a migraine for like 48 hours or something. Like you don't necessarily need an ambulance, but you need medical help. I once called 111 when I accidentally drunk some methanol at a festival. I'll tell that story one time. It was fine. It's completely ridiculous. Talking about harassment and stalking, saying it's sinister, saying I've called people TERFs, which I hadn't. People are genuinely frightened. To say that people are genuinely frightened by this, I am fucking terrified of these people who are creating these international declarations, calling to remove my freedoms and rights. You know, if they got their way, my life would be over. Like, most of the people watching this would have to leave the country, detransition, like, live in some kind of constant state of fear that just by going to the toilet at work, they might get fired or arrested or who knows what. And they're trying to pretend to be the victims. They're trying to say they're scared. Like, you walked up to a public thing, you signed a list saying, I want to ruin the life of every single trans person in my country. And someone's like, oh, did you sign that list? And they're like, oh, I'm terrified. Fuck you. Then it's against GDPR. Like, obviously just gone all out on this. Nonsense. And it just, why have they panicked so hard? Why aren't you proud to stand for your position? If you genuinely think that this is about defending the rights of women and girls, I am proud to stand for the rights of women and girls. Every single thing, every single position I have, every single feminist position I have, which is about, fighting for women's reproductive rights. For some of the things on that list, but without the bit where they exclude trans women from it for no reason, I'm proud to stand for these things. I would sign a list that says, everyone should have reproductive freedom. And then if someone's like, oh, can I see if Katie Montgomery's on there? I'll just be like, yeah, mate, I am, actually. I wouldn't be calling 111 or whatever this garbage is. It's unbelievable. Why are they all panicking? Well, because it's fucking immoral. And, if I found out my friend had signed it, then I wouldn't ever want to talk to him again. And they're gender critical people losing friends all over the place. But also because, I guess me looking to see if Debbie Hayton's on it, now we know. Now we know she uses women's spaces and she signed a thing calling to ban all trans women from women's spaces. And we can bring that up every single time she writes an article for anything ever. And obviously that ruins one of their propaganda points. So, no wonder they're creating a huge fuss and trying to intimidate people out of looking this up and talking about their horrible, immoral, transphobic hate declaration, trying to ruin my life and the lives of every single trans person you've ever met. Like, fuck you. Anyway, that was quite a rant. I got into rant mode there. What I think the worst, I'm sure lots of people here would have experienced it at school where you were bullied and then you or your friend or someone says fuck off, and then the bully gets the teacher's attention. They're like, they just told me to fuck off, and the teacher tells you off. And then they look smugly at you because they've played the system, and not only did you get bullied, but then you got told off for being bullied. Like, that is what's going on here. These people are publicly declaring in some kind of proud supremacist statement that they want to eliminate you, take away all of your freedoms and rights, and then trying to intimidate you out of showing people that they've done it in a negative, explaining what's really going on and talking about how horrific this stuff is. It's so extreme. It is so extreme to call for a blanket ban of all trans women from all public spaces. That is so ridiculously grim. It's so extreme to call for a total ban of trans healthcare for under 18s. That will kill people. Unambiguously, people will die if they achieve that. It's disgusting. It's extremism. It's anti-trans extremism. And they're trying to whine that they're the victims on this. Just don't fucking sign a list saying you want to get rid of trans people. Fuck off. Anyway, you're free to go and read the declaration. You are apparently not allowed to click on the tab that says signatures and read them, because apparently that's breaking the law and against the Equality Act and against the European Court of Human Rights and against God. But I have included the link if you're brave enough to click on links and scroll through things. So let's move on to some brain rot. Let's chill out with some ridiculous things, though I am going to rant about this one. But there's not too much brain rot this week, so thanks for sticking with me through the rant. God, WHRC is disgusting, and I think we need to talk about it more. And, LGB Alliance has signed that document, by the way. This charity that's allegedly not anti-trans has signed that. Right, so this is Stella O'Malley, who did a Channel 4 documentary about trans kids, who is a gender critical person and seems to be an advocate of gender critical therapy. So she says, has a person who was born blind ever transitioned? I'm not asking about people who have gone blind. I'm asking about blind from birth. Now, if you were just a neutral person who's interested in the world, you might be like, oh, has a blind person ever transitioned? I wonder. And you might type it into Google. You can test this now. If you type in blind trans person into Google, you get an answer straight away. So if you're a curious person, you might do that because you might have heard of the internet and you might actually type that in. But if you were someone who is unaware of the existence of search engines, but somehow has a Twitter account, you might type into Twitter instead. But even then, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But it is interesting you've chosen not to Google it because there are examples on Google. But instead, you've gone to ask a question to 500 likes. Now, why this is relevant is because Gender Critical claims that rather than the medical consensus that we have today, which is that people are born with a gender identity and most cis people's matches their body and most trans people's doesn't, and that causes gender dysphoria and other things and is why it's beneficial for some people to transition. Rather than that, rather than being trans just a thing, rather than like, oh, some people are just trans and some people aren't trans, and being trans is just a property that some people have. Instead of that, they propose that, as we've discussed in recent episodes, that trans is like a combination of like 5 or 6 different things. It's men who are addicted to porn and who are misogynists and who want to be the women, they want to be the women they're in love with. It's men who are so gay that they're attracted to straight men, and so they want to transition to straight men. There are women who are trying to escape misogynistic sexism. They are women usually who are attention seeking, and there's a combination of things here. But in gender critical land, it wouldn't necessarily make sense for there to be a blind trans person, because if you're saying that like there's this like society's ideal stereotypes and you're constantly bombarded with them, you might think, oh, these stereotypes are oppressing me, I want to escape them, and that's what causes trans people. Basically, if it was true that there were no blind trans people ever, it would be a hole in the like theory that people have gender identities. If people have gender identities, we would expect blind people, deaf people, any people to just randomly, some of them be trans. There are some conditions which are correlated with being trans, for example, being autistic, being left-handed, and some other things, but there are some that are just uncorrelated. And I would be surprised, it's not impossible, but I'd be surprised if being blind correlated with being trans. So it's likely that the rate that blind people are trans is the same as the general population's rate of being trans. But if there'd never been any, then you'd be like, oh, this is odd, because we would expect that. So that's why she's asking this. She's not asking this because she wants to know, because she would have just Googled it. She's not asking this because, like, it's a genuine question. This is itself a coded argument against trans people existing. This is her saying, how come you don't get blind trans people? And then not listening to any of the answers. And this is gender critical. Like, this is what it does to you. This is the same thing as, why don't trans lesbians date each other, huh? They do, actually. But I do agree that if they didn't, then it would be an argument for your position. And that is why you haven't looked it up, and you don't want to know, and you just ask the question and move on. And the question itself is an argument for all of your followers, because now 500 people have been like, where are all the blind trans women or trans people? And the answer is they're around you, like they're fucking everywhere, and you should stop being a dickhead, and you should Google it if you want to know. Also, just to be clear, blind people do experience misogyny, do experience sexist stereotypes, do like porn as well. I'm sure some of them do. Like, there's no reason why they wouldn't be affected by all the other gender critical causes. So it doesn't even really make sense in gender critical land that blind people wouldn't be trans based on their theory. All this is saying, well, if there are no blind trans people, that's a hole in the medical, like the current scientific consensus. And it doesn't matter because they can just invent a new reason why blind trans people exist. They can have 15 reasons why trans people exist. It doesn't matter because all that's important is they're not real reasons. That's the important thing here. Anyway, we can move on from this. Get into Brain Rot Zone. So here is David Paisley, who's great and you should follow him. Amazing that people have convinced themselves that a flood of abusive cis men are being held back from accessing single-sex spaces by some overcomplicated admin. A good point. Then this person says, men don't go in women's spaces because there is a long-standing and powerful cultural taboo against it, and women will object in a vocal way, or at least self-respecting women will. They will dig at all the cis women who support trans rights. Don't you understand that, you utter clown? You clown, David. Don't you realise that we've had self-ID for decades and that society's rules mean that people segregate themselves? Oh, that's accidentally an argument against gender criticalism, isn't it? Oh, I didn't realise. Oh, what an idiot. Oh. Goodness sake. Just think, come on. Oh, God, do I even have time for a Jane Clare Jones rant? Let's skim this one quickly. I am resolutely pro-choice. Good. I agree with Jane. I think that Jane is, like what I was saying earlier, someone with a real feminist background who happens to be an idiot when it comes to trans people, as opposed to most gender critical people who don't, which is why I was nearly agreeing with her last week as well, but also was then not agreeing. So let's see what she's discussing. Someone says, there's a group of academics who are pro-life, a protected belief. They want to set up a network to research abortion worldwide, the harms of abortion, whether abortion should be time limited or even made illegal. Anyone object to that? Why? It's a protected belief. So the argument here is gender critical people are saying we should be allowed to preach our beliefs because they're protected. And then someone else is like, well, do you agree with this other immoral thing from preaching their beliefs? And then Jane Clare Jones's reply, I have no objection to people who are against abortion doing research, holding symposia, publishing papers. Firstly, because I believe in free thought, and secondly, because I would welcome the chance to show why we are right. And I think this is like the marketplace of ideas position. And this is where I think that gender criticalism starts eating away at radical feminism. I am not at all an expert on radical feminism. Maybe I should have stopped talking there. But I feel like acknowledging that the marketplace of ideas doesn't result in women's rights, because it hasn't. Around the world, it's going backwards today. Texas just got rid of abortion. Afghanistan's just gone backwards on every single woman's right. And it's not because we're not right. It's not because our arguments aren't good enough. We have all the arguments. In fact, feminists came up with the arguments for, all the women's rights that women should have hundreds of years ago. And they nailed it down. And they've written thousands and thousands of books about this. And it's flawless. For, arguing for these rights, arguing for women's rights to vote. It's just plainly correct. That is a correct answer. And anyone bringing new arguments are just going to be crap. They're going to be crap arguments because that is the correct position to hold. But women's rights still get taken away. So to try and pretend that it's the best idea will survive, it's just demonstrably false, or we wouldn't still have all these disgusting ideas in the world, because people have been arguing about these things for hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of years. And if we look at the history of feminism over time, actually, I won't go off on this too long, but there have been times in history where women have had loads of rights. And then 100 years later, they've basically been sex slaves because things go backwards. And it is not because they didn't have the arguments. It's because propaganda is a real thing. Propaganda is why the acceptance of gay marriage went down loads in the 90s. and went from like 30% down to like 8% or something before slowly climbing back up to where it's like 70 or 80% now. That wasn't because they had the good arguments. It's because, like today, they had a monopoly on the media and people only saw one side, and propaganda works. Like, people wouldn't do propaganda if it didn't work. Of course it works. So in an imaginary world where everyone has the same platform and the same voice and the same resources, then yes, like, feminist arguments would win. If everyone was a rational actor, then we would end up with a feminist utopia. And do you know what else would win? Trans rights. But, so this is the argument being made here, and I just think it's a bit naive, and I think it's a position that as a gender critical person you end up having to take. I think you could look at the history of feminism and be like, oh, it's not just about having the best ideas. We need other things. We need direct action too. We need to combat propaganda against women's rights. But then you're like, oh, but if we do that, if I say that, then you could use that same argument as a trans person. So I don't like that. So no, we're just having a freedom of ideas situation. Anyway, this was interesting. Time to talk about class. The women standing in solidarity with Marion Miller, who's a gender critical person, and those protesting self-ID are in the main from working class backgrounds. It's a Scottish class divide, with the middle classes taking away women's rights. And then this next person says, would be interesting. I'm working class. My parents struggled a lot financially. But then I went to university and now I have a middle class everything. However, my mind is still working class. And then the original person says, same. So what you're telling me is that you are middle class people who self-identify as working class, despite having none of the material conditions of being a working class person and absolutely just being middle class. Because you want to be working class, you've just decided it. And then your argument is then most people who oppose trans rights are working class. And you two are examples of it, even though you're actually middle class people. Suspicious. I don't quite know why they're so desperate to pose gender critical as a working class movement when it just isn't. But always trying to make it out that being trans is like a billionaire funded top down thing or a middle class movement, when trans people are significantly more likely to be working class than cis people. Embarrassing. Oh, right. Let's do this one. Let's read this one with the correct grammar. So, let's see if I can do this. This is to Anita Sarkeesian, who is an internet feminist. Biology forever people should be proud how they are born. Changing gender is just crazy and they're hurting themselves and it shouldn't be encouraged. Comma. Feminism isn't about rights, it's about ruining society, like hating men becoming totally normal these days. Thanks, bro. Good to know you are anti-feminist and gender critical. And not the king of punctuation. It's okay. Maybe English isn't your first language and I shouldn't be laughing. Crap argument. Wouldn't last in the marketplace of ideas. The beauty industry is moving more and more from women to trans women. Teenage girls and women nowadays are wearing less makeup, but they are being replaced by trans women. Have you noticed this? They're replacing us! The great replacement is trans women replacing cis women in makeup adverts. Well, actually, as someone who's like keenly aware of what's going on in the world of trans people, I haven't noticed this actually. I've noticed there are a few trans models for like the first time ever in history. But replacing, like, where's this coming from? What are you talking about? Teenage girls and women are wearing less makeup. Are they? Have you been on Instagram? I don't actually know what the statistics are, but I feel like the makeup industry is a growing industry. And I feel like if you're trying to suggest it's growing because of trans people who are 0.3% of the population, rather than cis women who are 50% of the population, or even cis men who it's now becoming more acceptable for them to wear makeup, maybe that's ridiculous. Moving on. Katie Montgomery, this is from someone called Genital Preference Task Force. Katie Montgomery is the face of trans homophobia. It doesn't get much worse. I will take that ringing endorsement, not of me, obviously, but of the trans movement. If I am as bad as homophobia from the trans people or the trans rights movement or whatever, if I'm as homophobic as it gets, then I don't need to worry about homophobia at all. Because I am aggressively pro-gay rights in every sense and have been for over half of my life. And very explicitly all the time. And I don't need to justify that. You can just look at my actions and my positions and question me on them. But what this is talking about and why the name is Genital Preference Task Force is this genital preference is a transphobic discourse that gender critical people love to bring up. And their argument basically is trans people are forcing you to like their genitals. And the answer to that is no, they aren't. And I am not doing that. And I am someone who has said quite routinely, if you're not attracted to my genitals, then okay, you're lost, mate. So even their example, even the forced gender critical thing, they picked someone who is like the polar opposite of their straw man position. So just bear this in mind when they say like the trans rights movement is homophobic. Oh no, I didn't mean that one. That was a really horrible cough. Don't judge me. When the gender critical movement is calling all trans people homophobic and stuff, they mean people like me. Who, even in their ridiculous straw man world where there are loads of trans people saying all this, that isn't, that's me apparently, even though it doesn't fit even in the most extreme version, even in the most bad faith take on what I say, doesn't fit into this. So it's just a lie. They just make it up. You know what's homophobic? Most gender critical people are homophobic. Most of them. 51% at least. Moving on. So talking of forcing people to date each other, and also calling back to gender critical people do not know what the Gender Recognition Act is. Here is Scottish Trans, who you should follow if you live in Scotland. In today's, whatever that is, Nicola Sturgeon confirms, in this year, we will introduce the Gender Recognition Act Reform Bill. Good stuff. And then this person says, absolute insanity. Straight men will have to consider dating intact males identifying as women. Let that sink in. That's right. Nicola Sturgeon is going to pass a law which says you have to consider dating trans women. I mean, I don't actually think that's a problem, is it? You could go, nah, if you wanted. But maybe you're suggesting that she's trying to enforce a law where it's required to date trans women. Somehow the incels got in power, but rather than being anti-trans, they are just pro-trans women. Which is completely against their ideology. What are you talking about? Where has this come from? What is wrong with you? My goodness. Here's a classic. Here's the same guy, Jay Smith, twice. Here he is complaining to the same person within minutes of each other. So he wrote 2 replies to the same person who was complaining about they, them pronouns. And he's like, my pronouns are they and them, me. How many people am I talking to? Them, 2 + 2 is 5 and you're pronoun phobic. Absolute top tier joke here. And then him, a minute later, says, I saw a person with their pronouns on a lanyard at work. Just kept walking and tried to do my best not make eye contact. So, mate, that thing where you said you didn't know how, if someone uses they, you don't know how many people you're talking to, and then you said, I saw a person with their pronouns. It seems actually you do. Every single time, because using they is just standard English. Singular they has been around literally longer than modern English. It's from Middle English, and it's actually older than singular you, and we used to have thou instead of you one person. We used to have thou one person, you two people. And then we got singular they, and then we got singular you. In like 1600, the King James Bible has singular you in it. It's normal, but they all want to make a fuss because they don't like trans people, but then they all accidentally slip up because when you talk naturally, it just happens. This guy who got in as part of the pylon on me, asking if Debbie Hayton was on the WHRC list of people who want to take away my rights. I'm not quite sure what this means. Katie is a Katie is a Quifa collaboratrix. Perhaps I'll let you invent your own idea of what that means. Thank you very much, Mr. Catboy Hat. I'm not sure why you're thinking about that, but we'll move on. So now we're going to do this. That was the last one. We're going to do my comment of the week. So if you would like your comment featured, please write a comment below. Obviously, it helps the algorithm and it's fun for me because I get to read all your comments and stuff. But, you know, it's good for the channel and what have you. But also, it's just fun to write comments. And if you write a cool comment or an interesting comment or a funny comment or whatever, then maybe I'll feature it next week. If you write it under this video. And that doesn't include live chat, so please write a comment too. Thank you. So here, Pepper S. Ghost says, last month, the Latter-day Saints Church, so that's Mormonism, said some homophobic/transphobic stuff. Nothing new. In response, students at BYU, which is their university which they own, began drawing rainbows and other pro-LGBT messages with sidewalk chalk on the corner of the university campus. It gets washed away every night, but they're back at it the next day to draw more rainbows. For over 2 weeks now, I may have contributed to this ongoing display of pride. Amazing. First, great for the solidarity for LGBT people there. Secondly, nice work, Pepper S. Ghost, for adding to it. And thirdly, fuck Mormonism. Yeah, excellent. So I think we got through that fairly well. I think maybe you heard one really horrible, like, cough. Perhaps I'll delete that later. Thanks for dealing with my very long rant about WHRC. I really hope to have communicated how bad this group are and how important it is that we highlight the fact that lots of the major gender critical organisations have signed this thing, and it's so extreme. There's no room for them to be like, oh, we've no issue with trans people. If they're calling for a complete, total ban of trans healthcare for children, trans women from women's spaces, amongst all the other things, you can go read the rest of it. Like, they're extremists. So, disgusting. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. I've seen the live chat's been really active. It's really fun to watch. I have thought about maybe doing some kind of live chat interaction, but I just think this show's too long. That I just don't have time for it. I would love some feedback. I'm considering moving over to season 4 at some point. I might get some new artwork. I might change it up a little bit and do different things, but I'd love your feedback. Like if this show's too long, or if it's not long enough, or you want more crowd interaction, or you just want just brain rot, or you don't want all the brain rot stuff, or it'd be interesting to hear what you think. What's your favourite episode been so far? What's good? So, yeah, if you would like, I would appreciate the feedback here or on Twitter, or maybe in a comment. And I will see you all probably next week. Definitely next week.